Okay, welcome everyone. So thank you all for coming. My name is Ulka Anjaria, and I'm a director of the Mandel Center for the Humanities at Brandeis University, and I'm very happy to be chairing this session on behalf of the CHCI Public Humanities Network. The Public Humanities Network represents a global community of centers and institutes engaged in building research through partnership. We recognize the public humanities as a diverse and growing field of inquiry distributed across many kinds of communities. So this year we were happy to inaugurate the Public Humanities Award for Leadership in Practice and Community. And this panel is a chance for us to hear about the projects that earned recognition in this award. So we had two winners of the award from University of Tulsa and UC Santa Cruz. And two of the projects that received special mention, and that is a collaboration from the Penn Center and University of Georgia and University of Maryland, Baltimore County. So we're very happy to have participants in those four projects here with us today to talk a bit about their work. So I'm going to introduce the speakers first, and then we'll have a we're trying to make it a little more discussion format-y so it's more interesting. So rather than each person present, I'll kind of ask a few questions and people will present shorter bits, and then that will leave room for the participants to converse with each other, and hopefully we will have time at the end for some Q&A from the audience. I'll begin with Dr. Dayne Riley. Dr. Dayne Riley is the Assistant Director of the Oklahoma Center for the Humanities at the University of Tulsa, where he curates gallery exhibitions on arts and humanities topics, manages the University of Tulsa's 101 Archer Gallery, and helps run public programming for the center. From 2022 to 23, Riley planned and organized many of the components for the Pathways to Freedom project, including musical legacies of the Dust Bowl, the all-Black towns of Oklahoma, and the work of sovereignty, all of which were funded by a grant from the Social Sciences Research Council and the National Endowment for the Humanities. Riley graduated with his doctorate in English literature from the University of Tulsa in 2020. His scholarly work focuses on British literature of the 17th and 18th centuries. His first book, Consuming Anxieties, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Trade in British Satire, is set to be published on June 14th by Bucknell University Press. Congratulations. Riley lives in Tulsa with his wife, Lori, and their two Boston Terriers, Daisy and Lobella. Dr. Saskia Nauenberg Dunkel is the Research Programs and Communications Director at the Humanities Institute at UC Santa Cruz. She manages research projects, graduate and undergraduate student programs, communications, and public humanities initiatives at the Humanities Institute, including the Community Engaged Research Project, Watsonville is in the Heart. Nauenberg Dunkel received her PhD in sociology from UCLA, and her research focuses on transitional justice measures used to address human rights violations. Alongside her work at THI, she serves as a research advisor for the UCSC Human Rights Investigations Lab for the Americas, and volunteers with the Santa Cruz Welcoming Network to accompany asylum seekers and refugees. Before moving to UCSC, she was a research affiliate at the UCLA Promise Institute for Human Rights, a program director for Global Youth Connect's Columbia Human Rights Delegation, and a Peace Corps volunteer in the Kingdom of Tonga. Robert Adams Jr. is executive director of the Penn Center on St. Helena Island, South Carolina. Founded as a school for the newly liberated in 1862, the Penn Center served as an important retreat site for Dr. King and other activists during the Civil Rights Movement. Dr. Adams holds a PhD in anthropology from the University of Texas, Austin, and an MA in sociology from the University of Florida. And our last presenter is Sarah Fouts, an assistant professor in the Department of American Studies and director of the Public Humanities minor program at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Fouts was a 2022-23 Whiting Public Engagement Fellow for the collaborative New Orleans-based work Project Neutral Grounds at the intersection of people, food, and the hustle. Fouts was the principal investigator for the 2022-2023 ACLS Sustaining Public Engagement funded project entitled Baltimore Field School 2.0, Undoing and Doing Anew in Public Humanities. Fouts' scholarly work uses ethnographic and archival research to analyze the stories of Central American and Mexican immigration in post-Katrina New Orleans, and shows how, despite being criminalized and pitted against other low-wage workers, immigrants use multiracial solidarities and grassroots resistance to shape politics and culture in New Orleans. Fouts' research interests include political economy, food studies, New Orleans, Honduras, ethnography, labor studies, and community engagement. So with that, I'm going to begin with the first kind of question, which is just for each of the speakers to give a brief introduction to their projects. And why don't we begin with you, Dayne?
Hello. So first off, thanks so much for those introductions. So I'm Dayne Riley, and as she mentioned, I'm Assistant Director at the University of Tulsa's Oklahoma Center for the Humanities. I'd like to start by thanking CHCI for this award and for the opportunity to discuss our work. Thank you also for welcoming us to such a beautiful campus. I've really been just enjoying tramping around everywhere and seeing all the beautiful trees. I also want to thank our Associate Director of the Center, Nicole Bauer, as well as our Special Projects Coordinator, Alex Isaac, who came out to help me accept the award on behalf of OCH. The Director of our Center, Sean Latham, would of course have loved to be here, but he's currently in Denmark preparing for a series of talks on Bob Dylan. So I want to take just a few minutes to provide an overview of the Pathways to Freedom project and the three major topics we explored during that project. For the 2022-2023 academic year, OCH chose freedom as its central theme. With this theme in mind, we chose three different topics that examined aspects of Oklahoma's history and culture and that wrestled with this really complex idea that is freedom. Through a grant from the SSRC and NEH, we began exploring three separate yet interconnected topics: the musical legacies of the Dust Bowl, the all-black towns of Oklahoma, and tribal sovereignty in Oklahoma. For each of these topics, we developed gallery exhibitions and public symposiums to ensure their nuanced natures were fully unpacked. This approach allowed us to build extremely collaborative partnerships with members of the public and especially Black and Indigenous communities within our state. For musical legacies of the Dust Bowl, we considered the creative aftermath of the Dust Bowl during the 1930s and 40s. And for this project, we really wanted to kind of go a little bit beyond just Woody Guthrie, those stories that are often told. And so we looked at the innovations of Black and Indigenous jazz musicians, such as Charlie Christian and Oscar Pettiford, and women like Sis Cunningham, which is actually pictured up there playing with Woody Guthrie as part of the Almanac Singers. Sis left her native Oklahoma in 1941 and would go on to publish the influential Broadside magazine, the first publication to bring Bob Dylan to a national audience. After completing musical legacies, we began working on the all-black towns of Oklahoma. An exhibition and national symposium on these historic towns, which are largely unique to Oklahoma, took shape at the conjunction of the Great Migration and the initial burst of black wealth generated by the state's oil boom. Oklahoma once had 50 of these towns, and now there are only 13 left. So as we developed the exhibit and symposium for this project, we collaborated very closely with civic leaders in the towns, as well as Oklahoma State Senator Kevin Matthews, who's been working on a lot of recent legislation to assist with tourism legislation to kind of increase people going to these towns. It actually, the symposium was the first event, public event in our new building, 101 Archer, when it opened in February 2023. And then our final project, the Work of Sovereignty, explored the complex issues of tribal sovereignty in Oklahoma using the lenses of the arts, the humanities, and law. For the exhibition, we worked with Carly Treese, a Muskogee Creek citizen and abstract artist. Treese was a member of our yearly Public Humanities seminar, and for the exhibit, she produced 13 paintings for the show, all of which examined the 13 colonies in Oklahoma named after tribes. For the symposium, we worked closely with TU law members and members of the Cherokee and Chickasaw Nation, and the event drew 250 people over the course of 3 days. And we were actually lucky enough to have Rebecca Nagel, award-winning podcast host of This Land, who provided our Humanities keynote address. So those are kind of the projects that we worked on as part of this grant. And through this project, we learned that a community outreach-based approach yields more nuanced exhibits and programming. And by allowing the community partners to shape these projects and by providing that kind of close direction to help them, we really sought to create spaces where they could actually tell their own stories rather than us just telling them for them. By doing this, we brought a lot of public attention to important, understudied aspects of Oklahoma's historical and cultural environment, while it's self-developing, while also developing an expansive public humanities practice that we've continued to try to work into our ongoing mission. Thank you.
Why don't we go down the line? So Robert, go ahead next.
Okay. I'm Robert Adams. I'm the executive director of the Penn Center in St. Helena Island, South Carolina. And we emerged in 1862 as a school for newly freed African-American students in the region of Beaufort County. But I would also like to say that we're also one of the birthplaces of American Reconstruction, the first Reconstruction. We were a laboratory for the exploration of the second Reconstruction, as we hosted civil rights activists and leaders, including folks like Ella Baker and Dorothy Cotton, Dr. King, and other folks from the movement. And we are, I think, poised now in this moment of risk to think about how to give birth to the third Reconstruction. How do we realize the American democracy that the first Reconstruction tried to advocate and push forward as a possibility for what American democracy could look like? In the sense that how could everyone be included? How could everybody have a seat at the table? How could we expand voting? How can we create opportunities for everyone to bring their treasures to the table of American democracy? And we still are in that process of trying to give birth to that third Reconstruction. That, we're a historical site, but our legacy is about creating the future, both for African Americans and the ways in which it reverberates out for other communities. Because in some ways, this question of African American freedom is at the heart of the struggle over what is the shape of American democracy overall. Recent events, underscore that. So we've been in this really wonderful partnership with the University of Georgia's Wilson Center, and this powerful partnership allows us to bring experts in the humanities to our campus and add that humanities focus to our programs. And it permits for a really rich and dynamic conversation in a way that we ourselves, with the kind of challenges we have as an institution, are not fully capable of doing. And so it allows for us to sort of, for example, in 2024, we had student residencies with UGA that brought over 100 students in from more than 15 colleges. It has allowed for art and music exchanges and research collaborations that continue to lift up and illuminate sort of knowledge that sits there waiting to be explored that can further our mission of bringing this third Reconstruction to life. And at the same time, this collaboration allows local community members to participate in these kind of intellectual discussions on their terms and from their place, their locality and positionality, to think about ways in which they hold this kind of knowledge that helps to move forward this sort of struggle for liberation. And so a real great part of this collaboration has been hiring local scholars in some ways that didn't really understand the knowledge that they held was crucial intellectual knowledge that could forward these kind of conversations. So we've just been very pleased with this collaboration and the ways in which it has further attracted other partners to come and seek us out and utilize us as a platform to continue this American discussion around the future of democracy.
Hi, everyone. Is this working? Okay. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Saskia Nauenberg Dunkel. I'm the Research Programs and Communications Director at the Humanities Institute. We're at UC Santa Cruz. My colleague, Irena Polic, is the Managing Director, is also here, and Pranavanand will also be here at CHCI from the Humanities Institute. We nominated a project, Watsonville is in the Heart, for this award, and thank you so much to CHCI for recognizing the work of Watsonville is in the Heart. Watsonville is in the Heart is a community-engaged public history initiative that preserves and uplifts the history of Filipino migrants to Watsonville and the greater Pajaro Valley. So the Pajaro Valley is located in South Santa Cruz County. It's north of Salinas Valley, here on the Central Coast. And they're really, this was sort of a previously limited knowledge and a very thin understanding of this history of Filipino migrants that came here in the early 20th century. And so this project was developed as a co-collaboration between community members in Watsonville that wanted to preserve and share this history, reaching out to faculty at UC Santa Cruz about how can we do this, how can we use the research expertise from the humanities to help develop a project, Watsonville is the Heart. And the reason we nominated this project from the Humanities Institute is because it epitomizes what we do as an institute, the 3 pillars of our work. At the Humanities Institute, we are dedicated to research excellence, we are dedicated to student success, and we are dedicated to public engagement. And, and those are all intertwined and mutually reinforcing. And the project has really all 3 of those elements. In terms of the research excellence, as I mentioned, folks who knew about Filipino migrants that had come to this area, if people knew much about that history, it was about the 1930s race riots that occurred. But there were only a few journalistic sources that had sort of captured that, and not much else. So working with our faculty, one of the faculty PIs, Kat Gutierrez in history, and Steve McKay, who's in sociology, a team was put together to start to do oral history interviews with folks in Watsonville to start to capture a much richer understanding of the immigrants' experience in Watsonville. And together they have put together the first ever digital archive of Filipino migrants in the Central Valley. This has included over 34 narrators and over 1,100 different material cultural objects that are now in a digital archive. We had a big public launch when that came up, so that includes photos, newspaper clippings, correspondence, and different things. As an institute, we've really been helping this project from the get-go. We organized the initial meetings to provide seed funding for the project, connecting them with our local Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History, and helping the team with research development. The second piece I just want to mention really quickly is student success. That's been a huge component of this project. There have been 2 PhD students, and one other thing I'll mention about the project is it's very interdisciplinary. So I mentioned the 2 PIs. One is from history, one is from sociology. We have graduate students also. One is from visual studies, which is in the arts division, another from history, and then 22 undergraduate researchers who've been involved in the project. And it's just a beautiful example of multi-tiered cascading mentorship in which we have a program at the Institute called our Public Fellows Program, in which we provide funding for students to get hands-on experience using their humanities skills, scholarship, with a project out in the community, so partnering with the Tobera Project, which is the community partner for this project. Students have gotten, they've been trained in how to conduct oral history interviews and how to collect materials for an archive and be able to do this work on the ground. And they've gotten feedback and mentorship from a whole range of folks, including the graduate students, the faculty, folks at the library and archives, and us at the Humanities Institute. And then just this last piece, which is a big part of what this award about, the public engagement. So I mentioned that they created the first ever digital archive. We had a huge launch of that archive in 2022. It was a standing room only event with over 300 people. It was covered in the news. There were interviews on TV and newspaper articles written about it. Alongside that, one of the things that's been really important for the project is to get this into the high school curriculum. So they've also been, our team's been working with the school district to develop ethnic studies lesson plans. And right now, for anyone who wants to come visit Santa Cruz while you're in California and Berkeley, or if you're in the area, we have an exhibition at the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History called Sowing Seeds that'll be through August. Being exhibited, and the Watson Villas in the Heart team, we're bringing groups of students to come visit the exhibition and do school tours and also incorporate that as part of their learning. So yeah, the public humanities component has manifested in a lot of ways, and it's just been an incredible project to be a part of.
Hey everyone, my name is Sarah Fouts, and I'm an assistant professor in American Studies and director of our Public Humanities program at UMBC, University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And I'm here with my colleagues Jessica Berman, Amy Freud, and Courtney Hobson on the front row, like good students there. And it's been an honor to be on this panel with everyone and hear about the Public Humanities projects and be part of CHCI and really get to network and learn from other folks here. I'm talking today. Am I in charge of the slides here? Okay. Oh, there. Sorry. Great. I actually did slides. I got lost in the email. But I'm going to talk about the Baltimore Field School here, which is, we started this in 2020. We all know what happened, so kind of had to shift gears. But it's an approach to public humanities research that moves away from extractive practices. We really work with faculty, grad students, staff, along with community partners to develop public humanities tools to work towards social justice in different neighborhoods in Baltimore. Our areas of focus are racial equity, housing, labor, food, and land justice. So these are kind of the areas of how we identify different community partners. And we really focus on building long-term partnerships that connect people in Baltimore with folks at UMBC, whether grad students kind of working on their dissertation projects or faculty doing long-term projects in the field with students, bringing them located in the suburbs of Baltimore, but bringing folks into the city. Let's see. So yeah, we started in 2020 with a Mellon grant and had to move virtual. We really focused on 14 UMBC fellows and had 2 community partners at this point, and focused just on grad students and faculty. When we got the grant again in 2022 through ACLS, we shifted more towards the community partners and really kind of listening to the needs, doing evaluations from the first iteration of the Baltimore Field School to kind of understand better what people wanted to do and how to shift to meet those needs. And we brought in 6 more community fellows and kept the 2 that we had on the first year. We were able to do the workshop, so we did a year-long year-long prep to have a workshop with faculty, grad students, and staff in the summer of 2023, where we really developed these different tools. We brought in different community partners to talk about projects and kind of share resources and really connect with ideas for folks to work on. I'll give some examples in just a second. During the off years, we used Maryland State Art Council funding to help support smaller projects in the community, so we still have ongoing Baltimore Field School approach and bringing people together. And really one of the big things that I'll talk about in a bit is more just this idea of connecting people that are doing the work in the city, connecting them with resources at UMBC, and really kind of helping identify how to kind of address these questions of power in that city and resources. Just the 3 projects I'll highlight really quickly is to Say Their Own Word series, which is a prison education project that was funded in 1979, 1980 by NEH, $300,000 grant, if you can imagine. And we were able to support the digitization of the VHS films, also the archival research, oral history, and a documentary short film that was produced as part of Baltimore Field School, still kind of building this into curriculum with our public humanities courses and also American Studies courses. And it's all archived in the special collections at UMBC. And Poppleton Now is a neighborhood organization project where really kind of fighting and winning against eminent domain, working with the archives to develop kind of historic preservation, to talk about space, to do walking tours, to really kind of respond to residents who are fighting for their houses and using these tools of the humanities to help support that. Historic Sharp Leadenhall, this is Courtney Hobson. Where are you, Courtney, over there? Help work on this project, which looks at kind of divestment and gentrification, and community leaders like Betty Bland Thomas, who worked to get a historic district designation and bringing tools to that neighborhood to kind of, these are ongoing projects to kind of help figure out how to preserve these spaces. So there are just a few examples of the different projects that we have, and I'll stop there.
Thank you so much for these tantalizing descriptions of your projects, as we just want to know more. I wanted to ask, since we're talking about risk at this conference, I wanted to ask, what you've given us is really examples of successful collaborations, but I wanted to ask if you could tell us a little bit about the challenges that you faced and kind of how you overcame them in these projects. I'm thinking of 2 kinds of risk. One, which you hear about in community-facing projects, which is one is, skepticism of communities around academic institutions. Many universities or other centers of higher learning don't have a great relationship with the community they live in, and there's, I think, very rightful mistrust around universities. So that's one risk. And then on the academic side, thinking of just the way that this kind of work is supported by our institutions or not supported by our institutions, and how for many of us the kind of path to promotion and tenure and promotion is very much kind of seen as much more traditionally. So there's risk also for scholars who kind of embark on collaborative projects, especially in the humanities. So I'm wondering if you could briefly say something about whether these are challenges that you've faced, whether and what, how you've managed to think about them. And I think whoever wants to jump in we'll keep it more casual this time.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about the skepticism that you see with people that you're trying to connect with that are from a very different walk of life from you. With the All Black Towns project especially, we really sought, with that project especially, to connect very closely with these members of these towns. I got to know probably 4 or 5 of the town leaders really, really well. And, going into it, it was absolutely necessary, not just for me to gain their trust, but also to put myself in the right frame of mind to work with them. Because I had to really think about the fact that I am not the expert in this. And going into these towns, I am from a rural Oklahoma background, so there are a lot of personalities I recognized pretty quickly. And everyone was so willing to share their stories. And I think starting from a place of realizing that, yeah, you have a PhD and stuff, but 18th century British literature is far from all black towns of Oklahoma. And knowing that they are the experts in this and allowing them to talk with you, relay their expertise, tell their stories, and really listen. I think that's the challenge because, as everyone in this room probably knows, we work at a very fast pace, and that's not the pace that they're working at. Most of these mayors are working 40-hour-a-week jobs. Some of them are also farming, supplementing their income, and they're also leaders in their towns. So, you can't expect them to just answer an email instantly. You need to call them on the phone and give them time to, you know, talk about the way they see things. And so I think a lot of it is starting from a good frame of mind, and then also, you know, trying to learn from another person that has some unique insights.
Thanks. I'll join a little bit on some of the comments that you were sharing to this great question. I mean, a big part of it has been building trust, and so much of that has been relationships, and so our Watsonville in the Heart team has just been amazing about spending so much time in the community, not just to go into the house and do an interview, but to share meals, to be part of the community events, to be there for the festivals, and they're really just incredible relationships. There's been a lot of tears shed when we had this opening launch for the exhibition because of how close everyone feels and through this project and the trust that's been built. So that's been really key, and key to the approach that our scholars have taken to this work has been about being co-creators of the project and co-creators of the knowledge. So our community partner, the founder of the Tobera Project, Roy Resio, and then the team of other community members involved, every step of the way, from the way the project's been designed, to the way that things are analyzed, to the way that the exhibition's been developed. So this project got a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, and there have been a series of workshops to prepare for the exhibition, and at each of those workshops, community collaborators have been sharing their feedback on how things are developing and their suggestions for the project. So that's been really key, that it's not to just kind of go in there with this idea. I wanted to mention that. I think another piece too for us has really been the students and the student involvement. We're a Hispanic serving institution at UCSC. We have a lot of first generation students, that have been historically underrepresented in higher education, and they also, build a really strong bridge coming in and doing the oral history interviews. They bring a lot of knowledge, and they're also treated as a part of the team, as everyone's contributing to this project, and thinking about those power dynamics has been really important in approaching the project. A couple other things I wanted to say. One, though, to your point about the timelines, this is always tricky, right? There are the pressures for faculty having to publish in academic journals. Sometimes those are, behind a paywall, et cetera, and the deliverables that the community wants to see. One thing that the team has really done is they've been, I think, publishing a lot on the methods, which has kind of helped just share through the process, and throughout it, been really focused on sharing with the community. I'll end with, I guess, one last thing I wanted to say was, as we've been putting together the materials for the exhibition, there's also been sort of a question about, when you do an oral history interview, that can be really long, it could be 2 hours, and sort of how do you then cut that so that it's a short, little segment that you listen to when you're on an audio tour? And also, what about sort of conflicting narratives and, sensitive topics around race or labor? So those are still some challenges that the team, we're constantly kind of navigating as we present this in a public forum that is accessible to a broader public audience. How do you capture, those tensions and nuances? So there's not always easy answers, but it's something that we think a lot about.
We're really addressing a lot of the issues in Baltimore with eds and meds. So in West Baltimore and East Baltimore in particular, you have universities coming in and kind of actively displacing residents. So it's kind of hard to build trust in those situations, right? We're with a different institution that is, again, in the suburbs, but still kind of part of this university kind of extractive history in that city that is ongoing. So I think what my colleagues have set up here is this idea of just showing up, being there, being consistent, really at the individual level, I think is really important, and really listening and building research questions that aren't top down, that aren't just helicoptering in, but are actually building these questions, taking cues from community partners, recognizing what's already going on, and then how can we support that instead of coming in with new ideas. So I think this kind of bottom-up, research-up approach is really important to that research. If you're not familiar with it, DeVarian Baldwin's work in the Shadows of the Ivory Tower is a great look at how universities have been actively displacing different cities and urban spaces. Looks at Chicago, Baltimore, different places, New York City. So there's like, we're really kind of trying to respond to that, to not be extractive and kind of move away from that history. The addressing kind of the risk, I think, is a great question, and UMBC has been really supportive, especially with the Drescher Center, in supporting academic and community engagement for P&T, and we've built community engagement into our P&T guidelines at UMBC. We did it first in 2019, and again, we revisited it for our department P&T guidelines. I go up in the fall and really am gonna test it, and I'll let you know how that goes. So, you know, it's kind of really kind of a mission of the university, which is something I'm very proud of being part of. And also, I think something that's really important, we all deal with the bureaucracy of working with community engagement, that's really a challenge, but also kind of the language in contracts, the contractual language and intellectual property that really kind of, the university has ownership, et cetera, and I've worked with Jessica Berman, who was really instrumental in getting that language to be changed to having shared power, or just power, you know, with a community partner. And that's, you know, that came out of our community partner saying, absolutely not, this is our project, this isn't UMBC's project, right? And so we were able to change that language, which I think is really important to the work that's being done. So, yeah.
I think at the Penn Center, we always have to be kind of cognizant of the fact that we are one of the places where, and we're one of the sort of, part of our mission is to protect Gullah Geechee culture and history. And so we always have to be really aware that this early form of African American culture has been studied by social scientists for quite a long time, and that St. Helena has been a laboratory for extractive research since 1800s, right? And so that the folks that are on the island, they can trace back their grandparents, their great-grandparents, and their great-great-grandparents as informants in research projects, and projects that didn't necessarily paint the island in the best light, and that also didn't really kind of capture the ways in which they themselves have been waging a battle since the 1860s to redefine American freedom. So as you come into the community, you have to kind of realize that baggage, and you also have to kind of figure out the ways in which the communities are they're critical stakeholders in the institution itself. And, you know, sometimes that's a hard dance to kind of like juggle as you're a regional, national, and international site, right? So you have to juggle all these various different kinds of stakeholders at the same time. And you have to sort of bring in the local community in ways in which they feel ownership of the process. And then if I think about, you know, part of the job too, because for St. Helena, this idea of a come here versus a been here is a big dynamic, insider outsider dynamics. You know, as anthropologists, you recognize that right away, and you do the regular techniques that you would do in trying to get into a community for research and any other circumstance, but also you don't abdicate your role as translator, as facilitator, as fertilizer, as facilitator kind of thing, of trying to translate some of these risks and perils as a sort of are reflected in the actual, both your legacy, but also the moment that we're in. And so to think about ways in which, like last night, Stephen talked about how do we get unstuck, to take that question and really to sort of like think about it in a local manner. What does it mean to be stuck? And how can we move to the actions toward creating the world that we desire on St. Helena? And at the same time, thinking about the first poet who said, let's build a circus in the square, to think about with the resources and opportunities we have in this moment of peril, how can we create a circus of possibility? And then to go move on to think about this idea from the second poet of I will not move on, to commit yourself to not moving easily from the trauma, injustices, and pain that need to be unpacked and need to be healed to be able to get to the places that we need to be at. And then finally thinking about this the last poet from last night who said, evil has an address, and to think about ways in which you can use a platform like the Penn Center to create an alternative neighborhood where goodness, hope, and freedom thrive and inspire folks like a lighthouse.
Thank you so much. I have a final question, which, I mean, some of what you've kind of covered already, several of you in your presentations, but I know that there's a lot of interest, there's increasing interest, especially from students and graduate students and undergraduate students in kind of public-facing, community-engaged humanities work, which is really exciting. I'm wondering if you could give some advice for people interested in starting this kind of work, maybe by way of kind of how you came upon these projects. So we're seeing the finished project seems very impressive, but also intimidating. What is the seed that began these projects, and how might that be kind of a lesson for people interested in this kind of work?
Well, it's fitting that we're at CHCI because we're here a group of centers and institutes, but I think, it was really critical to have an institute behind this project that saw the seed of an idea and was able to provide the funding to really grow the project into something much bigger. So, as an institute, providing that seed funding and then helping with the research development to identify other grants and other support, and, sharing of the project publicly, and also the connections. So when the idea first came about for Watsonville is in the Heart, our community partner, Roy Resio, came and met with the faculty and met with Irena Polic, our managing director, and who was a former board member of the Santa Cruz Museum of Art and History and could kind of envision how this could all become something much bigger, and now we have this exhibition, at that museum. And so, the Institute's really been a key home. I think as we think about public scholarship and publicly engaged work, thinking about different types of publics and sharing this sort of with our local public and sharing back with the Watsonville community and sharing the project more globally. So how do we kind of communicate to all these different audiences? And I think the work of an institute really can be to translating, sometimes complex research and jargon in a way that's really understandable. That's been really key, is how do you explain your project and how do you make it accessible and how do you kind of bring people on board to understand what you're doing? And then just like the final point I'll make is about, public-facing work can manifest in so many different ways. That's been a really neat aspect of this project, and I hope will be an inspiration for others that are thinking about doing more public-facing work. I mean, it can be everything from, as I mentioned, the exhibition that we have right now, but also, how does this historical work make its way into curriculum, to the, type of public-facing articles that we're writing that have a different audience in mind, and community events, et cetera. So, I just encourage everyone to think big and think creatively and work with your institutes.
I would say it's important to try to pull in students and members of the public into a team, really illustrating throughout the project that it is a collaborative effort, that all of the projects I've worked on have always been so much richer because there's been so much constant talking about the project. And I'll have this amazing idea late at night and I go in and pitch it, and sometimes that gets pruned. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's great. Sometimes, though, it needs shaped a little bit. And sometimes, members of the team will come in with something that I hadn't even, I wasn't even in the same universe to think of that. And so I think modeling that to undergrad and grad students, that, these kinds of projects evolve and they become much richer and more developed by discussing them. I think that at its core is exactly what we're supposed to be doing, having conversations together so that you have broader conversations, how to speak with others so the members of the public can get involved and help shape the process too. And, ultimately help us all to kind of communicate a bit better.
I have two things to talk about. One is the importance of, and I never thought I would say this, but the importance of evaluations and assessment, pre and post. Don't tell anyone. But it's been really kind of this idea of the seed, but from the first to the second iteration of the Baltimore Field School and everything in between really came out of, these big adjustments that we've made are responding to qualitative responses in these evaluations and assessments. And it's really people saying, what they wanted to see and really trying to go back and do that. I know that sounds very elementary, but it's been really valuable. And this isn't like assessment in terms of like quantitative audience numbers, et cetera. It's like really this rich qualitative responses from the faculty, all the staff, the grad students, and especially the community partners of what they want to see next and how they want to see that implemented. So that's been, and I will say kind of the nuts and bolts of that is we hired a community psychologist. We built that into the grant for both iterations of the project, and it's been so invaluable to have her input and her focus groups and all this data from what she's done to build in our reports. And the second thing is really just this idea that, a project, it's not just like a semester timeline and the project's done. What I've noticed is like we just keep building out these projects, and we have really strong foundations that can kind of build into different things depending on the situation. So it becomes this really flexible, versatile projects that are ongoing, and kind of bringing other people into the projects and really seeing how we can connect different issues across the city. And I think that's been really important and stuff you don't think about until you're doing it, that makes those connections.
I think I relish this opportunity to take on the challenge of offering students, helping to guide them on how to engage communities, especially communities of difference, because oftentimes our communication across race, class, and other differences is sort of blocked by fear, the fear of making mistakes, so that we have to sort of encourage students as they try to engage community, learn how to engage with, to step out on respect and love, and then to further step out on faith and the ability to take risk about, that learning is a process of errors as well as discoveries, but that it has to be rooted in curiosity. And then also to teach young scholars and intellectuals and community activists to pick yourself up after you make a misstep. Because oftentimes in this work, some of the best learning comes from misstepping. And to sort of be able to dust yourself off and sort of translate that into a different approach on the next encounter.
Thank you so much. We have some time for questions. We have a mic here and a mic that is moving, perhaps. I'm sure there are questions, curiosities, comments. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for this, these really interesting presentations and outlines of the projects you've been doing. I sort of ask this type of question at almost every public and community engaged scholarship workshop that I go to, but could you each speak more about the ways in which your centers and funding structures support community partners? As you mentioned, Robert, that there's a lot of time, that your community partners are spending a lot of time, but they also often have lots of other things going on, and I think, Dayne, you said the same. How is it all written into the grants that you're paying for their time? You mentioned that you paid to have a community psychologist to help with the assessment and evaluation portion, but also sometimes you just need to pay people to be in the space. And that can be sometimes challenging within university funding structures. And just simply with not having the administrative structures to pay people for their time.
So yeah, great question. Love to talk about the money and how that moves. For the second iteration of the field school, that was one of the things that we decided to do, was increase the number of community partners and also the amount of money we paid them for their participation. So, and this, I'll give a little story to tell how it came about. We were writing the grant for ACLS, and Eddie Conway, who was passed away in 2023, was a Black Panther political prisoner in Maryland State Penitentiary, and we were in a meeting with him as we were writing this grant. It was separate, and he was like, if we just had someone, if we had money to pay Cameron to digitize these VHSs, then, and I was like, how much money would that be? And he said $10,000. So that's what we wrote in the grant. So for all 8 community partners, we moved $10,000 for each partner for the year-long partnership on that. How sustainable is that? Not very sustainable, right? But we do have a cohort. We'll go up for another grant in a year or two and try to do similar thing and have another cohort. And in between, we try to fund, if we're bringing in the community partners to be part of the our whatever we're focused on that year, like we just did a project in April, we'll make sure that they're compensated for their time, the planning and then the actual event as well. So it's very much centered in that part of our work.
So between in our collaboration, the grants do pay for participation of some of the local residents to be scholars in the process, but also we provide, in terms of engagement, provide the kind of programming that does meet the community's needs, and I think offers them up opportunities to kind of see reflections of themselves in new ways that allow them to kind of build trust. We just recently had something where a opera singer, a Grammy-nominated opera singer, did a presentation of Gullah spirituals. We're considered one of the birthplaces of, African-American spirituals. Michael, row your boat ashore, that kind of stuff, right? And so this opera singer decided to take on some of this songbook and kind of give his own spin on it, but he wanted to be able to first take it to the community and let them sort of like interface with him around this work. And the kind of feedback that we got from community members of seeing their work being done by such a famous individual was affirming, but also the ability for this gentleman to sort of translate what a lot of people are increasingly not hearing in this music, not being played, seen as something of the past. So that's the kind of sort of interface of try to meet folks' needs and try to sort of involve them in the process, not just, again, historically we have extracted knowledge from them, set them down, taken the knowledge. This much more tries to recognize them as intellectual laborers, and also trying to provide the sort of cultural reflections and gifts that everyone can sort of feel like it sort of empowers them.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Definitely to the points that have just been made, we also are always writing in stipends, honorariums for the community participants in grants to participate in these projects. But I just wanted to go back to sort of our conversation about challenges, because I do think it is a challenge in terms of the university bureaucracy and processing these payments that we as staff at the Institute, are dealing with, and it's just really important. So, basically what happens is, these payments can be written into the grant and promised to participants, but it can involve a whole lot of paperwork for them to fill out in order to get their payment, and then that has to go through a whole process through financial affairs, and it can take a long time for them to see the payment. So it's been really important for us to also build those relationships and communications with the community partners of what to expect, and when we're promising payments, to help continue that trust, and explain to them the various steps and help walk through the forms, and make it as as much as possible, but it's also something that we're kind of having conversations on campus about what we can do, and trying to collect evidence of these types of barriers we have, because our campus does say we want to be doing more, community engaged research, and we want to be doing this public humanities work, and so trying to also, look for ways to improve the process within our campus as well.
Yeah, so with these projects, for the NEH grant, we wrote in a specific amount to be paid. Essentially, each of the symposia had 7 speakers, 1 keynote, and then 2 panels of 3 people. So the keynote was paid a little bit more because it was more of like an hour-long speech, and then each panelist was paid equally. We felt that this was a good way of approaching things, providing more equitable sort of approach. We also, for especially people driving in, like to give the example of the all black townspeople driving an hour that have to take off from work to do this kind of thing, we're also trying to pay any sort of transport, pay for their hotels and stuff. And then also to just speak to institutional support, I would be remiss to not point out how amazing TU has been to support our efforts. One thing with the All Black Towns especially, we had very early on teased the idea of doing some live stream for people that might not be able to make it, because a lot of these places are about an hour from TU. And very early in the process, as we talked about it, we felt that it would be a slap in the face, because one of the biggest issues these communities face is infrastructure. They do not have good internet. You're very likely going to have difficulty using a cell phone in some of the areas. And so TU really stepped up, and they actually paid a professional videography crew to come in and film the whole thing. And they, on their dime, printed DVDs of it that we then sent out to the communities in thanks, and also for those people that, for health reasons or monetary reasons or whatever reason, would be able to watch this moment, because it was a really amazing event where a lot of interesting connections were made between members of the community there as well as members of Tulsa. So, like I said, I think TU really did an amazing job of listening to the needs that were there and working to make sure those needs were met.
Thank you so much for that question. We've reached the end of our time, but I hope you can join me in thanking these participants for their presentations. We look forward to hearing more about the project.